not because it kills them, but because it shatters them. You see, spiritual awakening isn't a graceful unveiling of light. It's a demolition, a sacred unraveling, a slow burn that turns the structures you spent your entire life building into ash. It doesn't whisper sweet truths. It screams through silence, rips through illusions, and exposes everything you've been hiding even from yourself. Most people retreat. They run. They numb themselves. They slip back into the dream, back into the familiar, not because they're weak, but because awakening reveals something so raw, so untamed, so wildly alive that the personality they've clung to can no longer contain it. And when that identity begins to crack, it feels like death, because in many ways it is. It's the death of the false self. You've probably been told that awakening is bliss, that it's light, peace, love. And that's not untrue, but it's only half the truth. The other half lives in the dark, in the shadow. In the holy chaos where everything you believed about yourself, your world begins to dissolve, not physically, but existentially. The meanings you assigned to everything gone. The identity you spent decades constructing collapsing. The goals you once chased hollow echoes in a chamber you no longer recognize. This is the part no one talks about. The part that's left out of the Instagram quotes and spiritual memes. The part that isn't glamorous, marketable, or safe. It's the part Carl Jung warned us about when he said, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." Because awakening doesn't arrive with incense and soft music. It arrives with a quake, a rupture, a moment sometimes subtle, sometimes catastrophic, when the life you're living begins to feel like a lie, not a malicious lie, but a necessary one. A scaffolding built to protect you from truths you weren't yet ready to hold. But now something inside you is ready. Something ancient, something sacred, something so alive that it refuses to go back to sleep. That something, call it soul essence spirit, starts shaking the foundations. Suddenly the dreams you once chased feel foreign. The conversations you once loved sound empty. The things that used to bring you pleasure now leave you aching, and you're left in silence. Not a peaceful silence, but a screaming silence. The kind that drowns out the voice you used to call me. This is ego death, not a metaphor, a real visceral psychological disintegration of identity. And it's terrifying. If you resist it, it hurts more. If you fight it, it feels like madness. If you surrender, it still rips you open, but in that ripping, you catch a glimpse of something eternal. Something that was never born and will never die. That's why most people don't make it through. The old self doesn't go quietly. It screams, it clings, it negotiates. It convinces you that what you're experiencing isn't real. That you're depressed, broken, lost, and maybe you are. But not because you're failing, because you're waking up in a world that was never built for truth. The map you were given was never meant to lead you to yourself. It was meant to lead you away to conformity, to success, to safety. But awakening asks you to fall, to descend, to strip everything away until only the real remains. Every label, every mask, every borrowed identity, gone. You'll lose people. You'll lose dreams. You'll lose versions of yourself you swore were permanent, and you'll have to let them go. Because if you try to drag them into the new frequency, they will rot in your hands. Awakening doesn't offer you a shinier version of your old life. It sets fire to it and waits to see if you have the courage to rise from the ashes. And still, most people turn back. They choose comfort over truth. They choose applause over authenticity. They choose the known cage over the unknown wilderness. Because that wilderness, it's terrifying. It speaks a language the rational mind can't understand. It shows you the parts of yourself you tried to bury the shadow, the rage, the grief, the craving, the manipulation, the fear. It doesn't ask you to destroy your shadow. It asks you to invite it home. Sit with it, feed it compassion instead of fear. Listen to its pain instead of silencing it with denial. But here's the catch: the shadow doesn't speak kindly. It speaks in sabotage, in jealousy, in addiction, in projection. It shows up in the ways you push away what you most desire. And until you turn toward it, you'll remain trapped in the loop. This is what most people misunderstand, and awakening isn't the end of suffering. It's the beginning of facing it, consciously, radically, unflinchingly. It asks everything of you: your grief, your silence, your willingness to fall apart with no promise of what comes next. It asks you to die while still breathing, to lose your mind, to find your soul, to watch the scaffolding collapse and say yes anyway. And in that yes, everything begins. The descent doesn't ask for strength. It asks for surrender. And that's what terrifies the ego most, because the ego was built to survive, to control, to predict. It was designed to keep you safe in a world that punishes vulnerability. But the soul didn't come here to survive. It came here to become. And becoming requires unmaking. Unmaking the armor, the narratives, the roles you've played. Only then can something real emerge. That realness doesn't shout. It doesn't demand. It waits quietly until the noise fades, until the mind exhausts itself, until the masks slip off and the mirrors crack. And then it whispers, not in words but in ache, a deep, unmistakable ache for something more. Not more success, not more approval, more real, more whole, more alive. And that ache, that's not a flaw. It's not dysfunction. It's the call, the sacred signal that you're ready to leave the lie behind. But here's the truth. Most people hear the call and pretend it's nothing. They bury it under busyness. They silence it with success. They drown it in distraction. Because answering the call means walking into the fire naked, trembling undone. But those who do, they don't become better versions of who they were. They become who they really are for the first time. You've glimpsed the truth, and once you've seen it, you can't unsee it. That's the shift. That's where everything begins to fall away. Most people run from that moment. They drown it with distractions, scrolling endlessly, numbing out with noise, losing themselves in the repetition of routine. Because to actually answer the call means something terrifying. It means losing the world you spent a lifetime building. And no one tells you how lonely that is, because the first stage of awakening isn't filled with light. It's not bliss or joy or divine revelation. No, it's exile. Exile from everything familiar. Exile from the version of yourself you curated to be accepted. Exile from the invisible web of validation you never even realized was controlling you. And in that exile, every part of you will ache to go back. You'll crave the numbness, the predictability, the comforting lie that used to help you sleep at night. But once your soul has tasted truth, even just a drop, it refuses to swallow the illusion again. You can't unknow what you now know. You can't unfeel what's been felt. So you wander through sleepless nights where your thoughts refuse to settle, through mornings heavy with emotions you can't name. You move through relationships that start to feel like echoes, like you're speaking from a different dimension, even though nothing has technically changed. This is the in-between. The cocoon. The space where your old self has died, but your new self hasn't yet emerged. It's terrifying. It's sacred. And it's where your soul does its deepest, most honest work. Here in this void, the shadow begins to rise. Not as a monster, but as a mirror. It no longer hides quietly in the corners. It erupts in every trigger, every sharp reaction, every unhealed wound that bubbles to the surface, like a scream from somewhere ancient and buried. And you want to run, of course you do. You were taught to run from pain, to fix it, to rationalize it, to mask it with positivity and spiritual platitudes. But this is different. Awakening is not a bypass. It is a confrontation. It is a raw, trembling gaze into the mirror of your own fragmentation. You are not being asked to escape the pain. You're being asked to face it, to sit with it, to feel it without running away, to let it teach you the lessons comfort never could. And slowly, very slowly, you start to realize the pain was never your enemy. It was the doorway, the crack in the shell, the fault line where the light could finally reach you. And then you start seeing the emotions you've feared: anger, sadness, fear, not as signs of brokenness, but as messengers. Each one carries a fragment of your truth, a piece of your wholeness buried beneath years of survival. You begin to soften. Maybe for the first time in your life, you feel something ancient and holy compassion, not just for others, but for yourself, for the child inside you who never felt truly safe, for the teenager who built armor just to keep breathing, for the adult who mistook busyness for worth, productivity for purpose. And suddenly, with that grace, everything begins to shift. You stop needing to perform. You stop needing to be perfect. You stop trying to be healed. You realize that awakening isn't about becoming better. It's about becoming honest. Honest about the mess. Honest about the beauty. Honest about the wild paradox of being human divine and terrified, eternal, and breaking, limitless, and wounded. And that honesty, it becomes your ground. Not false confidence, not polished certainty, just truth. You no longer need to convince anyone of who you are. You no longer need to contort yourself to fit into rooms that shrink your light. You no longer need to betray your own soul just to feel safe, because now you understand you are the safety, not because you have it all figured out, but because you've stopped abandoning yourself in the places that hurt the most. You've stopped running, and that right there is everything. That's what most people never reach, not because they're weak, but because they were never shown how to stay. To stay with discomfort, to stay with the unknown, to stay with the soul long enough for it to whisper back. But you're staying, and because you're staying, something real is beginning to take root inside you. Something unshakable, not polished, not perfect, but raw, rooted, alive. And in that aliveness, something sacred begins to emerge. You start to see how much of your life was built on borrowed dreams. Dreams chosen for you by society, by fear, by generations of people who never knew what wholeness looked like, only what survival required. And survival, it asks you to shrink, to wear a mask, to trade your truth for approval. But you're not surviving anymore. You're awakening. And with that awakening comes something fierce, a sacred rage, a deep, thunderous, holy anger, not at others, but at the lie, at the roles you played, at the ways you twisted yourself to be accepted, at the moments you betrayed your own heart just to belong. But this rage, it's not a regression. It's a resurrection. It's the part of you that remembers I was never meant to live asleep. And you begin to speak not louder, but clearer. You say no without guilt. You say yes without over-explaining. You stop apologizing for being whole, and the world doesn't quite know what to do with this version of you. Because the world trained you to dim your light, to blend, to behave. But now you're a frequency it can't manipulate. You're a truth it can't distort. You're a mirror. Just by existing, you reveal the unconscious in others. This is embodiment, not talking about awakening, not hashtagging healing, but living it, breathing it, becoming it in every unguarded, unfiltered, unapologetic moment. And it's not always poetic. Sometimes it looks like crying in your car because your nervous system is unraveling. Sometimes it means losing people you thought were forever because your truth became too loud for their silence. Sometimes it means grieving a life you built with love because that life was crafted by a version of you that no longer exists. This is the cost of becoming. You don't just lose your illusions, you lose identities. You lose comfort. You lose the scaffolding that once held you together and now only holds you back. And what replaces it isn't immediate. It isn't clean. It isn't certain. It's a void, a wholly vast echoing void where the old no longer belongs and the new hasn't yet taken shape. You wake up not knowing who you are. You walk the world feeling both ancient and newborn. You try to speak, but language feels too small. You try to plan, but the future laughs because this space, it isn't meant for building. It's meant for listening, listening to the whisper beneath the noise. The whisper that says, after all the unraveling, all the collapsing, all the shedding of illusions and layers that no longer served you, finally arrive at a place of profound surrender. And here begins the next chapter, letting go. Let go of the timeline. Let go of the blueprint. Let go of the need to know how the story ends or what it all means. Let the mystery shape you. Let the unknown strip you. Let it peel away every last defense until only truth remains. And what remains that is real? Not the persona you have perfected, not the performance you've polished, not the curated identity you have held up like armor. What remains is breath. What remains is presence. What remains is the raw pulsing aliveness of simply being without the need to prove, perform, or protect. In that sacred space, you finally meet yourself, not the future self you always hoped to become, but the real one, the wild one, the wounded one, the one who remembers why you came here, for the world taught you to forget. You stopped chasing your purpose like a goalpost, because you become it. In the way you move, in the way you speak, in the way you stay soft in a world that demands you harden. You stop climbing meaning like it's a ladder to somewhere else. Instead, you embody meaning in your walk, in your stillness, in your refusal to abandon your soul even when the night feels endless. This is the deeper phase of awakening, the one no book can prepare you for. Not because it's hidden, but because it's sacred. It's not something you study, it's something you live. It's not a mountaintop, it's a rhythm, a return, a remembering of who you were before the story, before the mask, before the noise. And when you begin to live from that place, not visit but live, everything changes. Not overnight, not with fireworks, but quietly, steadily, unmistakably. Your life becomes simpler but richer. You stop explaining yourself to those who never listened. You stop outsourcing your intuition to experts. You stop betraying your inner knowing to win approval. And something remarkable happens. You stop searching for love because you realize you are it, not in a mirror, not in their eyes, not in the future, but here, now, within. And from that space, trust begins to bloom. Trust that the life aligned with your truth will find you. Trust that what falls away was never truly yours. Trust that what stays belongs on this deeper frequency. You stop rushing your becoming. You stop begging the universe for clarity. You stop fearing the unknown because now the unknown feels like home. There's a different kind of strength that rises from surviving the soul's collapse. It doesn't roar. It doesn't boast. It doesn't shine the way the world celebrates strength. It is quiet. It is sovereign. It is the strength of someone who knows who they are without needing to be seen. Because once you've died to everything false, what remains cannot be shaken. Not because it's unbreakable, but because it has been broken and returned in deeper form. You don't walk through life anymore searching for proof that you matter. You walk as the proof, not for them, for you, for the part of you that remembers what it costs to reclaim your voice, to walk alone, to burn the lie to feel real again. That kind of strength isn't built overnight. It's forged in fire, in the tremble before truth, in the nights you weren't sure you'd survive. But now there's no need to survive. Now there's only truth. You live simpler, not because life is easier, but because you've stopped spending energy pretending to be what you're not. You stop building relationships out of fear. You stop trading your time for approval. You stop shrinking your depth to make others comfortable. You've met yourself too deeply to pretend again. And what once felt like exile now feels like grace. The unraveling, the silence, the solitude, it brought you here. To this stillness, to this truth, to this sanctuary inside you that nothing can ever take away. Now you watch others run, perform, ache for belonging. You see them chase meaning like shadows on a wall. And you don't judge, because you remember, because you carry the scar, but you also carry the light. Not the kind that blinds, the kind that beckons, the kind that says you can stop running now. You are allowed to feel. You are allowed to rest. You are allowed to come home to yourself, and some will. They'll see in you what they've been dying to remember in themselves, and others won't. And that's okay, because you no longer wake people up. You simply stay awake, you stay grounded, you stay real. This is the quiet revolution. Not to fight the system, but to stop feeding it. Not to preach change, but to become what can no longer be denied. Your presence becomes a mirror, not one that flatters, one that reflects. Some will shatter before it, others will awaken, but that's not your responsibility. Your job is not to manage their reflection. Your job is to remain the mirror, to remain the clarity, to remain the fire. This is how awakening becomes power. Not through performance, but through permanence. You become what cannot be moved. Because you no longer live from surface. You live from source, from the self that was never lost, only forgotten. And now you remember. You remember how to rest without guilt, how to feel without shame, how to speak without shrinking, how to walk without explaining. Because your existence is no longer a question, it is the answer. You no longer ask, who should I be? You whisper, I already am. And that is the final threshold, not becoming more, but becoming you. All of you, the holy, the messy, the divine, the broken, the healing, the human, fully allowed, fully here. You are no longer trying to escape the human experience. You're here to inhabit it, fully, consciously, boldly, and this is why you survived your spiritual awakening, not because you mastered it, not because you transcended it, but because you stayed. You stayed in the fire. You stayed when it broke you. You stayed when it emptied you. And in that staying, you were reborn. Not into someone better, into someone true. Now you carry something unspoken. A frequency, a remembering, a light born not of performance, but of presence. And you walk through the world not chasing the next awakening, but living as the awakened.